of time wherein you guys just sort of have a free-flowing, open exchange. I guess my duty as moderator is to try and keep you guys away from personal insults and keep you guys on topic and try to make sure we're, going with one point at a time to try and keep this productive. So I guess if we can try to stay away from all of that stuff, that would be great. There is a 1 hour time limit for this debate, but besides that, I think that's all. So I guess I'll just let you guys talk. I guess which one of you guys wants to go first?
I can go first if you want.
I'm cool with going first as well. Who wants it more?
You can do it, Vaush. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. This will be pretty short, I think. Okay, wait. First of all, I want to say, for shout-out purposes, the person who's moderating this, named Mouthy Infidel, is actually a very competent debater and a person who I respect quite a bit, in spite of the fact that he probably thinks that I am a rad lib. So thank you for moderating. Short notice, I know. Okay.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me to moderate.
No problem. So with that being said, but again, we're not like friends, okay, no bias. With that being said, I'm a socialist. Broadly a libertarian socialist. I value things like freedom and democracy and I guess respecting the rights of the individual. And I think that sort of syncretically we can arrive from those positions to a broader socialist society. With that being said, I guess the reason why we're here right now is because you called me out on Twitter a little while ago at the beginning of May, Kayla Maupin. You said a lot of really weird stuff and it made me feel like we had some pretty substantial disagreements. Stuff like you kept saying like shame, like saying that I say all Tankies are fascists or what have you, claiming that like I'm spitting on the legacy of the Black Panther Party or of other people who were revolutionary socialists in their time, telling me like shame. You said shame quite a bit, which felt like I was kind of being like scolded by like a school teacher or something. But yeah, I guess I was a little bit confused by your intentionality there. I'd be interested in seeing if we could arrive at an amicable resolution. Also, if I do at any point seem tired or out of it, it is not because I'm disinterested in this conversation. It's because I just suffered critical brain damage following an earlier debate today. But hopefully that will not affect me. I am a strong man, and I will try my best. Okay, that's all I have to say.
All right. Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Vaush, we may not agree on a lot, but one thing I think we can agree on is that Fox News is no good. And you'll notice that whenever they have a Muslim on Fox News, one of the tactics they will use is they'll say to the Muslim guest, they'll say, "Do you denounce Hamas?" And of course, the Muslim guest will say, "I denounce terrorism. I'll oppose that." That's not enough. You must denounce Hamas. When they have an anti-racist activist or an activist against police brutality on Fox News, they'll say, "Do you denounce Black Lives Matter? Do you denounce the radicals and the Black Panthers?" And they'll respond, "Of course we denounce violence. Of course we denounce lawbreaking." No, that's not good enough. Somebody in the Black movement said something radical. We want you to denounce them. This tactic of demanding that people denounce other people in their movements is a tactic that the right wing has used against progressive forces and consistently uses. And the way it manifests it among socialists and against those who advocate building a socialist society is the demand, sure, you can believe in socialism, but you must denounce as loud as possible every country around the world trying to build socialism. You must repeat State Department propaganda against them. And if you don't do that, you are somehow the equivalent of a Holocaust denier or a Nazi. And that is very, very dangerous. It's a big problem in our movement. Now, Vaush, I know that you and I have very, very different definitions of socialism. I'm not going to change your mind, but I'm going to tell you the definition of socialism that I understand. It comes from Frederick Engels, from his book, which is one of the most important books in the history of Marxism, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, where he says that socialism is when, quote, "the proletariat seizes public power and by means of this transforms the socialized means of production, shipping them from the hands of the bourgeoisie into public property. Socialized production upon a predetermined plan becomes henceforth possible, and anarchy in social production vanishes." And I think that there are societies around the world that have done that have seized the means of production. There have been mass anti-imperialist and socialist working class peasant movements that have risen up, seized control of the means of production. And yes, they've done bad things. Yes, human rights have been violated. Yes, crimes have been committed, and no one is here to defend those bad things. But I think as those of us who want to build socialism in the United States, I think we can learn from those struggles. and that I think that portraying Tankies as if they are fascists or as if they are the equivalent of white supremacists is a big blunder. And this kind of tanky baiting has been a threat to the entire progressive movement. The war on organized labor began in the 1950s when they pushed some of the most revolutionary labor leaders like Harry Bridges and William Z. Foster out of the labor movement with this anti-Stalinism, this anti-Tankyism. And a lot of Trotskyites and social democrats went along with it, and it hurt the entire labor movement. Bernie Sanders' campaign, he was tanky baited because he said that Cuba's healthcare system has been good. 60 Minutes did a hit piece on him. That became the whole focus. Bernie Sanders won't denounce existing socialism loudly enough. This hurts the entire progressive movement. It's not helpful. And I hope that your audience, they may not agree with me about China or the former Soviet Union or that, but I hope that they will understand that trying to divide the movement, painting, people in the movement who are anti-racist and anti-fascist as if they are somehow the equivalent of the far right, which is very dangerous and rising and pushing hate, that I hope people in your audience will rethink that and try to build unity among progressive forces as we struggle against the prison industrial complex, the economic crisis, the rising police state, and try to get to a better world. That's where I'm at, Vaush. Let's talk.
Yeah, okay, so there are a number of points here that I think are maybe a mischaracterization of some of the things that I believe in. First of all, with regards to, so your ultimate argument is one against gatekeeping, effectively, that there's ultimate harm done to the movement when you engage in any action to distinguish the broader, the right-left from the parts of it that you want to excise. Unfortunately, excising undesirables from your movement is, I think you as a fan of the USSR would probably know, basically a necessary part of any revolutionary activity. With regards to the Tankies that are referred to, for example, I'm not referring to people who, for example, are at any point not as critical of the USSR as I am, or people who see value in some of the revolutionary movements in the developing world. I think these are perfectly fine things. I'm talking about people who aggressively engage in optics, which are antithetical to the things that I believe in. I'm not denouncing them because Fox News is telling me to. I'm denouncing them because they are my enemy and because they make us look bad. So, for example, while these people are by no means the majority, there are Tankies who defend Stalin. Anybody who is in any way, shape, or form in favor of either of the two components of socialism that you laid out, whether that be worker control of the means of production or the destruction of the commodity form, should despise Stalin. He was not a good man. And he did not do good for the movement. He just isn't a good person to hinge public representation on. And I wonder, then, how you would feel about the odds of Bernie Sanders succeeding in the United States of America, not if he refrained from denouncing the healthcare in Cuba or whatever, but if somebody had asked him, do you like Stalin? And Bernie had failed to answer in the negative. My issue here is that I think we're blurring the lines between people who have minor ideological differences but a shared goal and people who do not share a goal with me. Because there are people who defend bad things. When I hear people who are unironically defending, it's off the hands, like the Holdomer denials, like, oh, it was necessary, the kulaks were hoarding grain, there was nothing they could have done, they diverted grain. Like, this is abhorrent to me. Not only because it's morally impermissible, as far as I'm concerned, to deny, defend, the actions which led to a genocide, but also because it's materially wrong, and also because it makes us look really bad. Whether we like it or not, socialism and its development in the United States of America is going to be predicated on our ability to relate to the average person with things we know they care about, whether that stuff be healthcare or ending foreign war or bringing about a reconciliation between those who have wealth divides between them. I don't think we can achieve this by allowing people who adopt the aesthetics, optics, and rhetoric of authoritarians to run rampant within our movement.
All right. May I respond?
Yes, please.
I think you're making a little bit of a mistake. Now, there are two fronts I want to respond on. I can respond regarding myself, and I can respond regarding Tankies in general. In regards to myself, I have no interest in defending Stalin's personality and convincing anybody that Stalin was a good guy. I'm interested in defending socialism, not personalities. But you have to admit, the way socialism is presented in the United States, The argument generally is that it's failed everywhere it's ever been tried. It's created nothing but gulags and death and misery. And the response you generally get from socialists is, oh, that's all true, but I'm just so smart that I'll do it better. And that's a ridiculous argument. You look like a fool when you make that argument. You have to be able to deal with the history of the 20th century and point out that everything isn't completely black and white, that mistakes were made, but big achievements were made as well, like defeating the Nazis, like electrifying and industrializing an entire country. And that's the conversation I'm interested in having. I'm not interested in having conversations about Holodomor or the Moscow trials or anything like that. That's regarding me. However, when you characterize people who do question the historical narrative about the Soviet Union in this way, you need to recognize that you're talking about not just guys on the internet who might be obnoxious. Nelson Mandela was a Tankie. I will read you what Nelson Mandela said in 1986. Quote, "The Soviet Union is the torchbearer for all the hopes and aspirations. In the Soviet Russia, genuine people have been transformed from genuine people's power has been transformed from dreams into reality. The land of Soviets is a genuine friend and ally of all peoples fighting against the dark forces of world reaction." That's Nelson Mandela in 1986. So by saying that people that glorify the Soviet Union should be kicked out of your movement, you're disassociating from the African National Congress. Albert Einstein, one of the greatest scientists who ever lived, he gave a speech in 1942 called "What Russia Means to Us," where he spoke glowingly about the Soviet Union, how it protected national minorities like Jews. He himself was Jewish, and he saw how important the Soviet Union was in fighting anti-Semitism around the world. He talked about their achievements in science and how the Soviet state made a big point of subsidizing scientific research and development. And Christopher Hitchens denounced Albert Einstein, saying that his greatest flaw was his defense of the Stalinist regime in the Soviet Union. Helen Keller, read her autobiography and the glowing things that she says about Lenin and the Bolsheviks at the same time they were suppressing the anarchists and all of that. To write off people that associate themselves with the USSR and its achievements, or with China, or with Vietnam, or with Cuba, or North Korea. Yes, I said North Korea. You know, the Black Panthers sent delegations to North Korea. The Black Panthers studied Juche ideology. The Black Panthers waved Mao's Little Red Book. You should read Huey Newton's autobiography and see what he said about his time in China and how glowingly he speaks about Mao Zedong. Recognizing the achievements of existing socialism doesn't make you a lunatic, doesn't make you a wingnut. It makes you somebody who is open to understanding what's beyond capitalism. Now, my attitude toward these leaders is that we should study all of them and study both their failures and their achievements and blindly adhere and follow none of them. But as we move toward building socialism in the United States, we need to recognize the socialism here will be unique. We're not going to have Chinese socialism here. We're not going to have Russian socialism here. We're not going to have Venezuelan or Cuban socialism. When we have socialism in the United States, it will be a continuation of the progressive tradition. It will be the ideals of Frederick Douglass and John Brown and the suffragists and the labor movement. It will be that radical, anti-imperialist, anti-racist tradition of struggle in U.S. history taking power. But if you look at that history of struggle, some of the greatest voices in it.
We've got a lot to go over so far.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that there's two main strands here to deal with. There's the point of how we should engage with historical attempts at socialism, and there's also the question.
Oh,
regarding Caleb's charges.
Right, I've got I think an addressal of that written down, if I may, because I feel like that was a fair bit to bite into.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, if you wanted to, because I remember you said earlier that you wanted to stick with, like, one thing at a time. If you wanted to go over each of these main strands individually, we could do that unless you don't want to.
I'll broadly address this, and I think we can get into the nitty-gritty afterwards. I'm sure we can find plenty to disagree with there. So this is the problem that I have with when I talk with everyone who believes stuff like what you believe in. None of what you just said actually addressed my points, because I've never said it makes you a tankie to acknowledge the benefits or the successes of countries that called themselves socialist. What's more, the material conditions around the time of Albert Einstein or of Helen Keller or of Nelson Mandela were extremely different to those today, and their individual opinions on the extent to which the USSR has brought hope to the world has nothing to do with the material reality of how we should advocate for socialism today. What's more, nothing that any of these people said fundamentally disagrees with my ideology. There were great successes committed by all of these societies, But ultimately, like, if you back up, like, what you essentially just did to me was a massive appeal to authority. I criticized authoritarianism in the in the first like chunk that I got, or I said like these are the values which are antithetical to mine, and then you responded like, well, here are a bunch of people, here are a fuck ton of people who have ever agreed with these. I've read Huey Newton's autobiography. I'm very familiar with the ideology of the Black Panther Party, the group which initially got me into leftism. I know the fact that they're Maoists. I know that they had some ideas which contradicted with my own and many which do not. But the fact remains at the end of all of it that when we are talking today about what we want to advocate for, I do not think there is any room for people who glorify or defend authoritarianism or historical revisionism. You said earlier in that response, challenging the narrative. I'm very suspicious of that term, challenging the historical narrative, because I've heard it from people who, and I know you don't want me to draw any comparisons here, would probably be reasonably called Nazis by both of us. At the end of the day, we have to accept the fact that we do live in a highly biased socioeconomic point in time. But when we're making arguments in favor of moving forward, we can't refer to the imagined successes of these societies we defend because they weren't successes, not in the eyes of the average American. Now, you can maybe make slim arguments for Cuba. I think you can, because Cuba's done pretty phenomenally, all things considered. And if you want to go for like niche examples where Java has had a good like project going on its own, but if we're talking about advocating the interests of the average American, any attempt whatsoever to defend the historical legacy of these societies, which have been denigrated by history, is going to come off making us look like wingnuts. And I know that in large part because people who advocate the way Bernie Sanders does are infinitely more effective at drawing people towards leftism than people who go by hardline Marxist, like here's the historical reality, here's the theory you should read, here are the people we should stand. I guess just this old world tendency towards advocacy is very, very counterproductive in my mind, especially since I know for a fact a lot of the more active tanky communities are not only in disagreement with me on some historical issues, but are also morally reprehensible. Like, for instance, when it comes to like stuff like radical gender ideology, many of them are transphobes, at least in my experience engaging with some of these communities. Many of them are class reductionists, which I think is very funny for people who would like stand the ideology of the Black Panther Party. These are things like, and I feel like I can't call them out because if I do, I just get called like a radlib, you know?
Okay, so I'll respond to that. First of all, according to your definition, then I'm not a tankie. I know that a lot of bad things happened in the Soviet Union, and I would say that probably the political repression in the Soviet Union, the lack of free speech and open debate weakened the Soviet Union. The fact that people who disagreed with the government were disappeared, that basically made them so their arguments were never answered, right? It made it look like the government had something to hide, and they should have been politically educating the population and engaging them in debate and discourse, which in Cuba, you'll look at what they've done is they've mobilized the population to argue with anti-communist elements, and similar things have been done in China.
May I ask one question to clarify? Do you consider the modern day state of China to be a proletarian state?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Okay.
And I think it has a lot of problems, and I think that there are many things about it that are corrupt, but the fact that they have maintained, an economy where the means of production are organized by the state and raised 800 million people out of poverty, I think is a positive thing. But before we go on, before we pivot away from this, I want to answer one point. You talked about transphobia and such. The first transgender activist in modern U.S. history was Leslie Feinberg, who was a Tankie, a leader of the Workers' World Party. The first gay rights activist in the modern U.S. history was Harry Hay, who was a member of the Communist Party USA. The first Broadway play to defend gay rights was by Lillian Hellman, and she was a Tankie if there ever was one. She was a very vehement defender of Stalin. So
how do you feel about
you're generalizing when you try to yes, there is definitely there was a big problem of homophobia and banning of gay people from communist parties historically, no doubt about it. But I believe that's a little bit of an oversimplification.
How do you feel about transgender people, if I might ask?
I think the way that they're treated is awful. Bullying, hate crimes, it's despicable. The way people, have been separated from their families, kicked out of their households. I feel nothing but empathy for people that are transgender and face all the hate and discrimination on that basis.
But you agree that gender reassignment surgery is a valid way of addressing their, gender dysphoria in many cases.
If an adult chooses to do that, that's their business. It has nothing to do with me.
Okay, well,
I would like to try to get away from the transgender stuff. Just in order to keep us on topic.
oh sure, yeah. I just feel like sometimes reactionary tendencies are hidden by Tankies under the guise of like a class ideology. You know, like let's not address this. We'll only end up splitting the movement over hairs. But yeah, we can
Sure,
stick to
I
one.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Hate crimes, discrimination, bullying is something that any progressive would oppose. I'm with you on that.
Yeah. What about China, though? I guess this would be like something I'd characterize as a tanky tendency. I can't get behind the idea that China is a proletarian state. They have, they have just a rabid market economy. The only difference is that it's all like broadly organized under a state apparatus. But that doesn't really lend towards the individual power of the worker.
Well, I think if you look at their economy, it doesn't function on the basis of profits. The state, which is rooted in communities, every building has Communist Party members in it. There are 90 million members of the Chinese Communist Party throughout the country. They're very well organized, and the state controls capital on behalf of the population. Now, they do it in a corrupt way sometimes, but overall, it's been very successful.
But individuals
Mass eradication of poverty. They become the second largest economy in the world. Huge achievements, and it's because they don't function according to the capitalist logic. In 2015,
capitalist.
In 2015, the Chinese stock market, it crashed, and if a similar crash happened over here, there'd be riots in the streets compared to how dramatically it crashed. The country didn't even blink an eye because 90% of the population has nothing to do with the stock market. The state and the Communist Party run the economy, not profiteers and bankers. There's plenty of profiteers and bankers there, but they live in fear of a mass organization built by Mao Zedong in the mountains during a people's war that has taken power and transformed the country.
Yeah, this is exactly what I mean. They don't live in fear of anything. They're incredibly powerful, and the only way in which they're restrained is by their state of unelected officials, not by the people. The reason the people don't revolt is because the Chinese people probably know what happens when they take to the streets and express anger with their government. If I had to guess at any broader political or socioeconomic motivation to keep them from going out, no. The average worker in China has absolutely no control or credence. Precluding them from investment isn't the same as giving them control over the economy. They fulfill no component. They have a stock market and a market economy, which means they haven't abolished the commodity form, and individual workers have no more control over their respective businesses in China than American workers do over here in America. The only difference is that their state is more powerful. The only difference is that they've removed the democracy. I don't know if that brings people any closer towards socialism. That's one of the fundamental criticisms I have of the behavior of Tankies. Sometimes I feel like Tankies will call anything socialist as long as it's anti-American. China certainly is, at least in a geopolitical sense. They're our largest opponent, but is that really enough? Does that really fulfill the preconceived notion of what it means to be a proletarian state? You have to oppose the U.S. and be in a dictatorship?
Well, I was thinking maybe one thing that we could zero in on is because it seems like part of your guys' disagreement is just might stem, I'm not sure because I haven't heard your definitions yet, but I suspect that maybe part of your guys' disagreement stems from a fundamental disagreement on what the definition of capitalism is. So I was thinking maybe you guys could each define what capitalism is to you in order to help us establish whether or not China is one by both your criteria.
All right. Well, I will first respond to what was said. You'll notice China is one of the few governments in the world that actually supports workers when they go out on strike. And actually, there are a huge amount of labor struggles going on in China. And you'll see many instances of the Chinese government supporting the workers against the corporations. We all know about the horrors that happened at Foxconn and the horrors that happened at, I believe it was Hyundai or a car manufacturer. And what is not told is how the Chinese government communist union went out on strike, and the Chinese government supported the striking workers and forced the bosses to change their conditions. There are many examples of that. Now, of course, there are things to the contrary that shouldn't go on, but I don't think that's a fair characterization. I think that the bosses in China, the business owners, live in fear of a state that yes wants to utilize them to bring in foreign investment. That yes, sees it very important to develop a market sector, but at the same time will control them for the benefit of the population. And many of the private sector corporations in China aren't really private. For example, Huawei Technologies is technically a cooperative under Chinese law. But if you look at it, it doesn't function according to market logic, right? The way it functions, it's completely in coordination with the Chinese state, with the Chinese military. It produces products based on what the 5-year plan says. It's a state-controlled megacorporation, yes, that's technically private, but everything it does is in line with the Chinese Communist Party's vision.
Yeah, so it's an authoritarian agency in line with an authoritarian agency. Nothing you just described has to do with workers. In fact, China bans private unions or individual labor unions. Yeah.
No, it bans what are called free trade unions, which were set up by the CIA, led by J. Lovestone.
No, independent labor unions are illegal in China.
You can't just unions has been used against socialist countries around the world, and there's a constant demand in the New York Times and other publications that workers leave the communist union where they feel at home and join an entity controlled by the
You're loading everything you say is loaded with so much language.
That's
like
not accurate.
The glorious state like works in tide with the workers to no, independent labor unions are illegal. People have tried to form unions and it's been cracked out on.
U.S. controlled.
No, independent doesn't mean U.S. controlled. Freedom doesn't mean the CIA is running it.
Federation, Google J. Lovestone. Google,
no, I'm sorry. Do you have evidence that every single time individual Chinese workers try to form a labor union, it's being done in tandem with CIA work?
No, I'm telling you that when you refer to, quote, free trade unions, which is frequently done in American media, that refers to specific entities that are tied to the United States and American intelligence. It doesn't refer to just random groups started by random people.
Then what trade unions can people form? Or what labor unions can people form in America? In China, sorry.
Every Chinese worker is part of the government union.
Yes, the one government union.
Sometimes that union doesn't function the way it should. Other times it does. But when you refer to free trade unions, you're not talking about any union.
I'm talking about individual workers.
Specific grouping supported by the United States.
Yeah, I know. You've already said
NGOs that operate in China, and that's not fair.
I'm saying it is not legal for workers in China, independent workers who have nothing to do with the CIA, to independently form labor unions of their own volition. They have to join the All-Chinese Federation of Trade Unions, which falls under state control, another apparatus of worker rights that ends up being deferent to an authoritarian government. Likewise, your argument that China protects workers' rights is laughable. Foxconn workers are paid more in Taiwan than in China. China has historically been perfectly comfortable let their workers slave away at incredibly low wages because they benefit from foreign investment. That is many things, but proletarian state, it is not. That is capitalism. China is just state capitalism. It is the entire apparatus of a market economy run by private actors, except some of them are also controlled by an authoritarian unelected government. There is nothing socialistic about China, not in any way, shape, or form. Even the individual act of forming unions is banned by the government, and union organizers face a wide variety of pushback.
Unions.
They have one union.
But I'm going to let you finish. I don't want to interrupt. We don't want to interrupt each other.
They have one union, not independent unions. It doesn't really count if it's a state union. Do you know what the term controlled opposition is? Oh, I think you know, but I'll describe it for you. So controlled opposition is when you have a state with over 1 billion workers who have less worker rights than their neighboring countries, and if they want to get more rights, they have to subscribe to a union that is controlled by the state, which has a material interest in keeping them from developing workers' rights. That is what a controlled opposition is. Hey, don't like the working conditions in China? Why don't you join the glorious Chinese Communist Party's single labor union, where you can absolutely, definitely improve the material conditions of your class?
Are you finished?
Yeah, I am finished, actually.
Okay. Well, I don't agree with you about how you characterize state capitalism. I think state capitalism is Saudi Arabia.
You're not
Saudi
a socialist.
Arabia, yes, I'm sorry, may I finish my point?
Sorry, my apologies.
Saudi Arabia, the government pretty much owns everything. But all it does is make sure that profits flow into the hands of the royal family. It's a market economy, except the state is heavily involved. You can say that about Singapore, for example. South Korea, there's a huge amount of government involvement. Taiwan. And it's interesting because libertarians will often point to these countries as free market paradises. Well, no, the state is heavily involved. It's just a capitalist state trying to benefit a small clique within the ruling class. It's kind of Bonapartism, according to Marx. But the way you describe things in China, I see the Chinese Communist Party as an organization that has rapidly improved the lives of millions of workers, and it's done so by controlling the economy. You can point to many bad things, and I don't deny those bad things. Corruption's a big problem in the country. Many of the folks who were in the countryside and didn't have running water and electricity have moved into the cities and have been very badly treated by employers, especially in the regions that are a little more free market. No one would deny that China has a lot of room to improve on these things. But I don't think that, by definition, makes it capitalist, right? China executes billionaires. China very, very, very closely controls the corporations. You should read about Jintao culture, where corporations that have been caught polluting, they're forced to get on national television and apologize to the country in exchange for a shorter prison sentence. The capitalists of China live in terror.
Do you know what the term is for the private market being rolled into state authority?
China, the government controls the corporations. In the United States, the corporations control the government. Very different situation.
Do you know what the technical term is for an economy where the private sector is rolled into the authority of the state? It's fascism. We're talking about we're talking about fascism. The only thing you've been able to praise about the Chinese government is that they elevated. I thought
you didn't equate communists with fascists, so now you do.
Well, wait, of course, because you're not a communist and China is not a communist country. So this is just me calling a fascist defender a fascist. Yeah, you're literally just defending China. Whoa! You're literally just defending.
Let's try not to talk over each other.
You're just defending China on the premise. You're just defending China on the premise of its authoritarianism. That's it. You're arguing like, well, it elevated the country and made them wealthier. You can make that argument for Adolf Hitler. The blood spoils of the war elevated the material wealth of his country too. That is irrelevant when we're talking about the extent to which China is actually a socialist country. Every time you defend it, all you're doing is defending the extent to which the state has the ability to interfere in the market. That's not socialism. That's never been socialism. The workers aren't elevated in China. America has more worker rights than China is. I say with full and 100% confidence that the United States of America is more of a proletarian state than China is. And that's really saying something, because I am not a big fan of America. This is my issue with like the tanky aligned people. I don't think you give a fuck about socialism. I don't think you give a fuck about the workers. What I do think is that you hate America, which works in line with you working for RT and having been on Iranian state TV before. I think you're more interested in propping up state actors that oppose American geopolitical interests than you are in actually making life better for anybody. And if that's actually your interest, if you just want to go full fucking anti-America, that's totally okay, my dude. I'm not a huge fan of America either, but don't dress it up as you being a fucking socialist. Don't denigrate my social movement with your nonsense fucking fascist defending American anti-exceptionalist dogma. Why not just be honest with just go on Iranian TV and talk about how American like devils are going to rid the entire world of like the well-being of their children or something.
All right. Well, for the purposes of this conversation, I would like to try and stay away from discussing.
That's right. I only need to do it once. No problem.
His possible motivations or whatever. But yeah, go on.
Okay. Well, I'll respond to three of those points. First of all, the work that I do as an RT reporter and that my coworkers do is something I'm very proud of. And I find it despicable that you would repeat State Department talking points against us at a time where freedom of speech is under attack, freedom of the press is under attack. This is something I'm very, very disappointed in. I'm not here as a representative of RT. There are many different viewpoints represented on RT. I'm not going to dignify that with a further response. I'm very, very disappointed to see you promoting McCarthyism. Secondly, so am I a tankie or not? First, I wasn't a tankie because I didn't quibble about Holodomor. Now I'm back to being a tankie because I like China. But again, when I start talking about Nelson Mandela and the Black Panthers, all of a sudden I'll not be a tankie. I think the definition of tankie is very fluid in this conversation. Second of all, I consider myself to be the most patriotic person around. It is not in the interest of the United States to have a new war with China. It is not in the interest of the United States to have a new war with Iran or with Russia or any of these countries. Wars are devastating. We need international cooperation right now, especially against the pandemic. And right now, especially the anti-Chinese hysteria is very, very frightening. The idea that instead of admitting that we should be working with them to fight against the pandemic, our leaders are whipping up every extreme, unproven allegation against China is very, very disappointing to me. I want to see a United States that gets along better with China, with Russia, with Venezuela, with Cuba, with every country around the world, Vietnam, every country building socialism or building an independent economy. I want to see friendship and cooperation. So to describe me as someone who hates average Americans and all of that, I think socialism and having our government control the economy and fight for the people, I think that would be in the interest of the population overall. Now, I have to address this issue of fascism. You say fascism is simply authoritarianism. Well, many authoritarian societies have existed throughout history. Fascism, if you understand the Marxist tradition, is a form of Bonapartism. It is when capitalism is in a state of crisis, one section of the ruling class utilizing the state to rain mass death and destruction to beat down sections of the population in the hopes of stabilizing the economy. When Hitler took power, he basically represented the German industrialists. He set up concentration camps. He broke the labor movement, and he did not control the means of production. I mean, it was largely a private economy, and it was, it was mass killing of workers. It was a mass regime of political repression. The same thing was done in Italy with Mussolini. The same thing was done in Spain with Franco. Fascism is a form of right-wing Bonapartism rooted in anti-communism, rooted in the idea that we got to kill the commies. Anything's better than the commies. It's right-wing, and it's propped up by the United States. I mean, IBM, the computer corporation, ran the punch card machine for the Holocaust, right? I mean, Henry Ford was very, very closely tied in with the Nazi regime. And American capitalists thought Hitler was great because he was killing communists. Hitler was the ultimate anti-tanky. He preached this hysterical anti-communism. The Reds are coming, anything against Russia. He killed 26 million Russians in his invasion.
This is not relevant.
So to try and paint people who want peace and cooperation with China or Russia as if we are the equivalent of Nazis is just... That's historical revisionism I've ever heard.
So that's a nice misdirection. First of all, I never said fascism was authoritarianism. I said that economically it was rolling the power of the private sector into the state, which is the definition, and that is what China does pretty effectively. I noticed, by the way, that you described socialism as the government fighting for the people. Interesting, because National Socialists described it the exact same way. The government doesn't have shit to do with socialism. It's about the workers, my dude. I don't know why you have so little faith in the average proletarian, but your constant deference back to an authoritarian state to lead the vanguard is very strange to me. I don't know at what point I indicated I wanted war with China. That was a really weird departure from our conversation. I obviously do not. But you claimed, it's really funny to me that you claimed that it was disgusting that I would attack your defense of China during a time where our free speech was being threatened by fascists, when the free speech of billions of people in China is being threatened every single day by their government and their social credit system. The Uyghur Muslims are being genocided as we speak. And for you to make the argument while defending that country that I'm the one impugning freedom of speech by criticizing you for your authoritarian tendencies is fucking disgusting. I also like how you deferred to an accusation of me engaging in McCarthyism for criticizing China when all of my criticisms were that they weren't elevating the workers. It's an interesting criticism for a McCarthyite to make, considering my accusation is that it isn't socialist and that I would like it to be socialist. I don't recall McCarthy sitting up there on the bench in court and saying, I have the names of 100 communists who work in Hollywood and proof they aren't communist enough. I don't remember that part, but again, history is not my strong suit. Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, nothing you responded with has anything to do with the material conditions of the workers in China, which tells me where your headspace is at. Why not just be anti-American? That's so much easier. I'm anti-American. There are people here I care about, I'm stuck. What are you going to do? Probably better that America be socialist than not. So I got to work within this, purview. But I don't know, dude, just nothing you're saying is socialist. Here's a question, because we're ribbing back and forth. I have a question for you, okay? Do you not think that the fact that basically everything is under the heel of the state in China might be precluding the ability of the workers to actually engage in socialism, especially considering there are independent leftist organizations in China that have been suppressed by the government because it doesn't coincide with their top-down authoritarian approach?
May I respond?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think you sound very McCarthyist now when you bait me and say that I'm simply anti-American, that I simply hate America, that I'm motivated by a hatred of the country that I grew up in, of the country that I love and don't want to see dragged into a new war. When you try to appeal to jingoistic sentiment, he's working for the enemy, he's working for the Stalinists, that's McCarthyism. People know that. the government has nothing to do with socialism. Well, that's nice, but around the world, historically, when workers have risen up, the main thing that they've tried to do is take control of state power. You may not agree with that, and I respect your right to disagree with that. But if you read Lenin's book, The State and Revolution, if you read Marx's writings where he talks, I mean, I just read to you Engels, the proletariat seizes the public power. I mean, that's generally what the understanding of socialism is. Your definition of fascism seems pretty fluid. I mean, you say it's when the government is controlling corporations, then it becomes what's authoritarianism, then, well, no, I mischaracterized it. Your definition of fascism seems quite all over the place.
I specifically
I can respond to some of what you said about
corporate power
Uyghurs
into the
and
state.
social credit, but I'm not China's lawyer. I'm not here to say China did nothing wrong, but I can respond to that if you'd like.
Oh, I mean, sure. I think it's where, again, like I gave a very specific definition of fascism twice now. So, yeah, I don't know about that. Also, the workers haven't seized control of the state apparatus of China. A very small group of autocrats have, of billionaires and state and party officials. Do you think, like, the workers are in charge of the Chinese Communist Party? Like, do they vote?
So, I mean, as far as the Uyghur stuff, is China doing wrong things in those regions? Possibly. But you'll have to remember that so many of the things that have been going around on social media about that have been debunked. I mean, there was a video going around purporting to show police beating up a man for owning the Quran. It turns out it was from Indonesia. CNN.
Do we really want to go down this road?
I'm sorry. May I not be interrupted, please?
Okay, you do.
Miguel
All right.
Person of CNN was being interviewed, and she said that her child died in a hospital. Well, it turns out her child is alive, and the hospital records completely contradict everything she said, but that was broadcast on CNN. Hashtag still no info, which was this popular hashtag listing people who'd been disappeared. Investigations showed that a number of those people couldn't be identified. However, there were a number of those people on that list who were actually had never even been detained and were in their homes, right? Now, I'm not saying China never did anything wrong, but at a time when our government is trying to whip up suspicion and build a case for war, I take what they say with a grain of salt. I know that the war makers lie. I know about the Naria testimony, where they had the daughter of the Kuwaiti monarchy or this Kuwaiti royal family member crying in front of Congress, saying, "Oh, they're taking babies out of incubators to build a case against for the war against Iraq." It turned out to be a total lie. When our government and our media is trying to demonize countries, they often say things that are not true. And that's just the reality. So I'm suspicious of some of that. Now, the social credit system, there's been a lot written about how the way mainstream media in the USA portrays it is not completely accurate. The Washington Post has run articles. There have been many sources, even within the mainstream press, that say that narrative that you get is not completely right. One of the main reasons the social credit system was set up is because there are people in China who've been convicted of crimes and have been levied fines by courts, and the government has no way of collecting that money. So it bans them from traveling. And it says you can't book a flight until you get on a plane. Well, in the United States, if you get fined by a court and you're convicted of a crime, you're fined by a court, and you don't pay it, you can go to jail. The idea that people are barred from getting on planes simply because they tweeted something critical of the state, I think, based on what I've read, is not completely accurate. That's not to say they haven't done anything wrong, okay? Again, I am an American. I love my country, contrary to your McCarthyist accusations. I love my country. I want things to get better here, and I don't want to impose the Chinese system here. I simply want international cooperation and friendship, not McCarthyism, not war hysteria, not polarization.
So I noticed that you completely ignored the is the Chinese Communist Party democratically controlled by the workers question. That's okay. We both know the answer. I love that your denial of the Uyghur Holocaust right now, because
it's didn't deny anything.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
There are flaws
Denial.
In the official narrative. You're trying to.
Oh, I know flaws in the narrative.
I know what you're doing. I
flaws
didn't
in the
deny anything.
Oh, I've heard that before too. Hey, did you know that when the Soviet Union originally arrived at the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp, the plaque that they
right.
whoa, slow down there, Maupin.
Okay, all
did you
right.
wait?
Okay.
Hey,
Keep continue, right?
Did you know that the plaque that they originally posted suggested that 6 million died there, when in reality the updated number later said 1.47 million? Did you know that there was an order for a metal door that went to a camp that didn't actually have any door frames that could fit it? Seems almost like it might have been bought by another group trying to incriminate that. Oh, wait. I'm not saying that the Nazis didn't do anything, mind you. I'm just saying that there is undeniably a lot of war propaganda following, the World War II that we should probably examine critically before we, fully address any of the accusations here. Dude, You literally are doing this just because there are a couple. Just because, and you're questioning the official narrative.
I mean, and you started this by saying you don't equate people like me with Nazis.
Wait. No. I don't equate all.
Everyone sees how.
Wait. I don't equate all Tankies to Nazis.
I mean, the Holocaust is one of the most well-documented.
Can you let me finish?
History. And at the time that it happened, mainstream media in the United States
were the ones
downplaying it. It was mainstream media that was downplaying it, and it was leftists like myself that raised the alarm about fascism.
So
it was communists and socialists that raised the alarm and said Hitler is killing people. While people like you, people that hate communists, people that hate the Soviet Union, they were the ones downplaying the crimes.
Dude, you don't give a fuck about communism.
Completely being facetious.
Okay, but that's okay. We can back up a little bit here. Okay, so I know you're not denying the Uyghur Muslim genocide. Wow, he actually. Hey, can I appeal to the moderator here?
All right, let's give Vash the floor.
And it was about the fact that while leftists and socialists were raising the alarm about the crimes of fascism, mainstream media was ignoring it because they hated communists, because they preached hatred for the Soviet Union. And he wrote Horton Hears a Who to talk about Republican Spain and how the people, the republic was being crushed, fascists were murdering people, and the world sat back and did nothing. It was leftists, it was Tankies who raised the alarm about fascism's crimes. Yeah, you're just completely mischaracterizing it. Mainstream media was downplaying the crimes of Hitler.
Let's give Vash the floor for a minute.
Yeah, okay. So, as I was saying, you're not denying the Uyghur genocide. You're just taking a couple of misplaced, like factoids that turned out to be incorrect.
We don't have all the facts about what's going on in China. My dude! I'm suspicious of mainstream media. And the fact that you would equate me with people who deny well-documented events in world history is absolutely despicable, and I don't want to continue this line of discussion.
Wait. I can't just let you engage in genocide denialism and then walk away from it.
You've made false comparisons between me. Everyone's heard you. I'm done talking about this.
Yeah, let's just. Hey, it's okay. Hey, it's okay. Okay, my apologies.
Move on, please.
My apologies. Okay. I'll be nicer, but I do have to finish this one point. Okay, so often when defending an authoritarian regime against a genocide accusation, it's more optically and rhetorically efficacious not to outright deny its existence, but rather to draw up some questions like, hey, there is a lot of propaganda here. Maybe possibly there are some state actors who have, and then by doing that, you introduce the seeds of doubt that allow other people to then engage in outright denial. Now, I feel comfortable in making that comparison here because as Nazi Germany was a fascist society that engaged in a genocide, by every reasonable economic definition, China is also a fascist society currently engaging in a genocide. Though the societies are not exactly the same, there are many, many differences between the two. When we talk about a top-down authoritarian, xenophobic, ethno-state-like society that imposes state's will on the people, but then promises that the glory of the people will be brought about by the sovereignty and the power of the authoritarian unelected state, I think a little bit maybe, and that's kind of the argument that you've made as well, my dude. You haven't really made any arguments about the autonomy of the worker or the abolition of the commodity form. Every word out of your mouth to defend China has been defending authoritarianism, which makes me think you're not really a socialist. I read you this passage from Karl Marx on the third address in May 1871. But the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes. The centralized state power, with its ubiquitous organs of standing army, police, bureaucracy, clergy, and judicature, organs wrought after the plan of a systemic and hierarchical division of labor, originates from the days of absolute monarchy, serving nascent middle-class society as a mighty weapon in its struggle against feudalism. Or in essence, the worker seizing the state is not nearly enough. It's not even close to being nearly enough. All you're doing is replicating the previous system of government, except with different people in charge. So we need a more substantive change, which China has not engaged in to any extent whatsoever.
All right. Well, when the Iraq War was getting going, as I mentioned before, CNN played this testimony from a member of the Kuwaiti royal family saying that Iraqi soldiers were taking babies from incubators. And thousands of people didn't buy it. And they marched and protested against the Gulf War that took place. According to you, they must be all Holocaust deniers because they didn't believe mainstream media saying something against a regime that you don't like. That's despicable. I don't want to engage about this any further. We clearly disagree. It turned out to be a lie. It turned out to be a lie. People didn't believe mainstream media. They had questions about it. Oh my God! When mainstream media, says that a country is evil, We just have to buy it,
so
right?
Disbelieving a single,
right? Or else you're a Nazi, right?
Disbelieving
that's
a single
ridiculous.
data point is the same as being in favor with an authoritarian regime and then bringing
US
up a number of
lie
wait
when it's time to build the case.
Wait. You actually can't wait. Hold on. So just in case there are any people of like your IQ or lower who are listening right now, I just need to clarify when we're talking about what you just gave as an example,
right?
as opposed to my example of the Uyghur genocide. The issue is the Uyghur genocide is happening. There's proof it's happening. It's not just one report of questionable authenticity. There is a plurality of evidence concretely indicating that it is something that's happening. Is all the data coming out from Western media about it accurate?
If it's happening the way
Probably
you
not.
say it's happening, that's wrong, and I denounce it.
If it is, ooh, okay, all right.
But I'm saying that we don't have all the facts. There are a lot of fantastical claims made in mainstream media that people have questions about, and I am worried
it's just
about
unbelievable.
having a war
I'm
with
hearing
China.
this from like a leftist.
I'm seeing how consistently the U.S. media lies, how the New York Times mistranslated workers in their video about China's healthcare. I mean, there is consistent deception in U.S. media when it comes to all things regarding China. So I have questions about it. You know, have me arrested, have me shot.
Okay, I mean, I don't need to have you shot. This isn't China, so that's not how we respond to political dissidents. But yeah, that's insane. Like this is like genocide
when
denial.
You call Tankies fascists, everyone knows you're dog whistling to anarchists and Antifa to be violent. You are calling for violence.
What?
You would have had Nelson Mandela beaten up by Antifa.
What?
You would have had Albert Einstein punched in the face. You equate
What?
people that defend socialist countries and question the lies about them in media with Nazis. That's what you're doing here. You're doing that to me.
This is like when I argue with fascists and they're like, you want to kill all white people.
That spit on civil rights marchers because they were part of the Communist Party.
Well,
that's what you're doing.
So
The
my
Civil
criticism
Rights
at
Congress,
you,
a tanky organization, William L. Patterson, Henry Winston, great heroic organizers who fought for civil rights.
My criticism of you is that you've engaged in genocide denialism.
Stalin. You equate them with Nazis. You want violence against such people.
No.
That's
Just
despicable.
you. No,
That
my
is
dude.
despicable.
They're not all as bad as you. Just you. You're the one doing the genocide denialism. Nelson Mandela didn't do that.
Great American poet. He signed an ad defending the Moscow trials and defending the purges in 1938.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Is that the right thing to do? Maybe not. That doesn't make him a Nazi.
I didn't say he's a Nazi. Did he engage in genocide denial? Why are you conflating all these different things?
I'm pointing out that you are painting people with a broad brush. You're painting all differentiation with the U.S. media on international foreign policy.
No, I'm saying
accusations
you
against China or Russia or
are
other
defending.
countries. You're equating all of that with the most despicable far-right human beings. And
Can
that's
you
not
stop
right.
defending
And
fascist governments against claims of genocide then?
About this. I'm not going to change your mind.
Sure, okay. I just declare, and I'm not going to repeat my accusations so we can actually move on from this point. I'm just going.
I think we're hitting that hour mark. Do we want to do our closing statements?
All right. Yeah, you can give your closing statement first. How about that?
Actually, I think you went first in the opening. Do you want to go first? Or,
Oh yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, so I don't mean to make this like a criticism of people's personalities or anything like that. There is a persistent effort on your part to paint me as some kind of radical anti-communist. Funny, because you're the one who has failed to defend any aspect of actual worker ownership or commodity form abolition over the course of this discussion. You have painted me as somebody who is in favor of war between America and China, which is patently false. You have painted me as a McCarthyite for wanting China to be more socialist. And you have painted me as somebody who just blithely accuses everyone of being a Nazi, which isn't true. You are the one who got to the genocide denial all on your own. I did not lead you there. You walked there on your own. So I didn't even expect it. I didn't think like it was that bad, but I guess it is. I guess we are at that point. So my main issue is like, yeah, I think people like you are a literal fucking toxin, not only to socialism, but to the workers of this country. I don't think you give a fuck about them, their well-being, their autonomy, their freedom, their alienation from the means of production. I think you give a fuck about some little cult personality cult you're trying to build while working in tandem with other non-communist states that just happen to dislike America. And I would like to remind that you and everyone else who is listening right now that hating America, while based, is not an ideology. And that if you want to be a real socialist, you're going to have to substantiate yourself a little bit more than that. Funny that you're the person who assigns, I suppose, the tanky label to himself, yet I am the one who seems to have a greater understanding of the actual like definition of socialism and how it should be applied. Plus you're white. All right, go for it.
I don't know what you said about my relatives, but whatever. You know, I know you're probably going to give this video a name like I destroyed some tanky, but I just want to review for your audience what they've heard from you so far. They've heard from you that that authoritarianism is the definition of fascism, that China is merely authoritarian when it controls the economy on behalf of the working class. I've ripped that to shreds. We've heard from you that Tankies are transphobes and homophobes, and I've shown you that Tankies are some of the biggest and defenders of LGBT rights in U.S. history and basically launched the movement to free LGBT people. We've heard you bait me over my job and call me anti-American over and over and over again, but then insist that that doesn't matter because you're anti-American also, appealing to basically McCarthyist and jingoist sentiments. And over again, we've seen you talk like a Fox News employee. You accuse me of denying a genocide. I asked questions about a current event that is going on at a time that U.S. media is actively mobilizing us to hate China and has said things inconsistently. I'm not denying things because I don't have enough knowledge to deny things. I have questions about what U.S. media is saying about China. You act like this is some atrocious crime, and that sets a very, very dangerous precedent. By doing that, the next time there's Remember the Maine and we're sent to, go to war with Spain, or the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, you're not allowed to question it, because if you do, then you are just like a Tankie. You've said that you don't equate Tankies like Langston Hughes, like Nelson Mandela, like Helen Keller with Nazis, but yet you equate me with Nazis when I do the same thing that they did in their time, which is question the mainstream U.S. media's narrative and accusations against socialist countries. So people can look over the tape, they can look and see what they saw, but I really think what you're doing is quite dangerous, right? I'm not China's lawyer. I love my country, and when you equate China and you equate China with authoritarianism, I think you're doing yourself a little bit of a disservice, because right now many people across the United States are suffering. They are not having jobs. They are unemployed. There's opioid addiction. There's a prison industrial complex. And what they want, they don't want some hippy-dippy worker co-op in the woods. They want a government of action that will take power and fight for them, that will rebuild this country, that will stand hand in hand, arm in arm with countries around the world, not preach hate, not try to whip us up into a new war, but instead build international friendship and cooperation, which will rebuild the crumbling infrastructure, which will lift up communities that have been downtrodden. They want state power. They want authoritarianism on behalf of the people. Popular power, workers' power to stop the crisis that we're in. And saying that socialism is just, employee stock ownership program or something like that is not going to appeal to them. The lie I've heard my whole life is that everywhere socialism has ever been tried, it's been nothing but a failure. It's done nothing. It's never achieved anything. That's a lie, Vaush. That is a lie. Socialism has had huge achievements and successes, and pointing them out does not make me the equivalent of the far right, and suggesting that is very, very dangerous to our movement. The worst thing about anti-Tankyism, and this will be the last thing I say, is that it doesn't work. When people say to you, hey, you're a socialist just like Stalin. Stalin and the Soviet Union did nothing but horror. If you go, oh, no, I'm a good socialist. I'm not like one of those. Oh, no, I'm a good socialist. I hate all the countries. If you do that, you just look weak. You look pathetic, right? There will never be a socialism that the New York Times editorial page will approve of. I saw in Venezuela how the Venezuelan government bent over backwards to accommodate the opposition, to give them a voice, to let them participate, to let them have rallies, let them run in elections. U.S. media still says Venezuela is a brutal dictatorship with no dissent allowed. There will never be a socialism that U.S. media will not demonize and make extreme allegations against. That doesn't mean we should blindly believe everything these governments said. I believe in questioning. I believe in questioning and looking into facts, which you are trying to intimidate people out of doing when it comes to China and other countries.
I'm not intimidating anyone, my dude. I just have a YouTube channel. I know you probably dream of being like the CCP chairman or whatever, but
bye-bye.